Alright, welcome back guys, this is Val and we're gonna uncover the second method of using backgrounds with some extra camera freedom, like a little bit of slight movement but also depth of field and zoom. So the method works like this. We're gonna remove this, so use none. Alright, and I forgot to mention when rendering the first method, which we covered in the first video, and you're in the environment sub tab of the render settings, you gotta use the dome or dome only, or dome and scene. Okay, so don't use scene only, that will not work. All right, so thing is, we're gonna add a little bit of a plane. Let's just set it to, I don't know, 50 meters for now. All right, create. And let me remove some of the, let's see if I can remove all this stuff inside, like the interior. Oh, that was a bit too much. I like to remove some of the interior. It's way too much stuff in the plane. Just real quick. Not sure I can remove all that. Let's see. I think I removed too much here, right? Yeah, the whole section is missing. So this would just involve a bit more work to get it without the props. It's a little bit heavy and takes a while to update. That's why I wanted to just remove some stuff. Anyway, so our plane needs to be raised and rotated so that it is behind. Let's use the rotation tool. It needs to be behind, and it kind of, if you will, if I zoom out, it needs to be pointing straight towards the camera. So you want to have like nice clean angles. You don't want to have it at an angle, but it needs to be behind your plane. So in this case, we have skewed the camera a little bit, right? So our plane is, as of now, not really straight looking. It's like almost, as you can see, it's a little bit skewed right over here. And you don't want it to have that close to your plane either. So let me just move it further away. And it's now over there. And the further away you get, obviously you got to scale it up. So let's do that until it reaches the far end of everything. Now we can also scale it on the Z to get a, or X, to get the correct screen proportions of the background. Now when it's set, we click on it, go to surfaces, and on here we want to, there's really two things you need to understand about this plane. One is that it can receive light and also shadows or not, and it can also glow or not, glow without light. So I'm going to cover both real quick. When you add to the base color, you basically add it to the channel that will receive a lighting. So let's use here, let's use the full version. Let me just browse. So let me just select it here, the photo, and there we go. Now it's upside down, obviously, so let me straighten this up. You can either, let me just look up the tools, universal, and you can rotate it like that. All right, you can also flip it. Let's use the rotation tool, like so get the right angle. All right, and then scale it to fit the entire image. Now, as you can see, you have a little bit of camera movement, right? Suddenly you can move a little bit because you move towards the plane, and you can zoom in and the photo will follow. And also you can skew the camera. So you can, for instance, go ahead here and select, let's say we want to have a little bit of Z rotation on the camera. Whoops, on the camera. Let's select this, let's go to perspective view, locate the camera, it's down here, right? And then I'm going to do on the auxiliary viewport, have a view through the camera. So I'm going to click on the camera and I'm going to rotate it. Let's say we just go behind the camera so you can see what I'm doing. Use the blue ring to skew it. See what we can do? And that, just see. Something is not right because this should, because I'm rotating, oh, the jet for some reason got parented to our camera. That was not intentional. Now you're seeing that, right? So you have that as an option right now. What you also have is that when you set the depth of field, which is this dot over here, or sometimes a line, depends on how lucky you get. Let's say, I just want to turn off the headlamp. Well, let's keep it on. It helps sometimes. Let's set it to just the nose of the ship. All right. And this will now blur this ship and the photo behind. And how much the photo will be blurred depends on the distance between the plane and the photo. So you can that way also design how intense the depth of field effect will be on the photo. The closer the background is to your plane, the less involved it will be in the blurriness. And the further away is the more blurry it will get, right, over distance. That's how this works. Now, there are here on the plane a few properties you need to be aware of. So let me just save this. And here's how it works. So basically, if you go to surfaces, you got the base. And the base means just how much will it receive of the light. And basically, if you drag this down to a more gray toned version, it will receive less light, become darker. All right. If you recolor it, you will also tint it at the same time. Whoops. Let's get back to normal. What you don't want to do with the photo is add glossiness. So drive it to 0. No glossiness. Use black on that. No reflectivity. Go down on that. Now you have the second option, and now the plane now will receive the same photo we designed earlier on in the previous video, and it's the same global illumination we designed in the first video. So if I now click on render, let me just save this. Let's click on render, and if we do a preview, you will see that we still have the same lighting, but there is a huge difference here, and that is that the plane, I'm talking about the plane behind the plane, so to speak, is also catching and receiving and casting shadows. All right, so you gotta be careful so you don't point any shadows on it. And because you can see, you're seeing the shadow here from the plane. All right, so you gotta be very, very careful not to cast any shadows on it. I'm going to show you how to get rid of the shadows. That's one way of doing that. Besides the obvious way, which is to just direct the sun away from it, like for instance going here and saying, hey, we want to have a different slight rotation on the sun, that would change how the shadow is projected on it. Further on, the shadow is received because you have base color on. All right, and what you can do really here is also do something called emission color, which makes the background, and another way you can remove the shadows is to move the background further away. So if I, let's say, move the background further away here, let's just zoom in a bit. Man, today's preview is not as fast as I'd like it to be. There we go. Oh, come on. That's the background, right? Now, if I move the background, let's say I just use the universal tool and just move it away. it will now change or remove the shadow it receives. Granted, right now we also have an issue with scale because we moved it away, so we need to counter that with a larger scale. And don't be afraid of large numbers, and the far away you get, the more numbers, the higher you need to increase this here. Right, so the second option is to go for the emission color. If I choose white here, it will start to glow. And if I then increase the luminous, you have the plane, the plate kind of glowing with a haze effect on it. All right, and if you make this blue tinted, you have kind of like a fake haze, which is kind of cool, right? This haze comes from the fact that the plane as of now glows entirely. Everything on it glows. But if you add the same texture to here, it will now glow proportionally. Means that the darker parts will glow less, the brighter parts will glow more. So you have a more natural response to it here. And now if you really punch it here, you get a very much brighter background. And you can obviously tint it here in any way you want to control. These two components, the emission and the main color, the base color, can co-work and coexist. Right now, the background plane, which means that the background plate, so to speak, not the plane here, receives lighting from two ways. One is that it's receiving lighting from the global illumination, and the other that's self-glowing through emission. Now, if I remove this one, just paint dark, it no longer receives lighting from the global illumination system, this one here, the environment. It no longer receives shadow either. Okay, if you drag this down to 0, you don't receive any shadows, which is great, right? But because it doesn't receive any lighting as of now, you need to punch this one a little bit more to counter for that. There is a caveat with that, and that's when you start to punch it quite hard here on the luminous, it starts to glow and emit lighting. So eventually, depending on how far away this plane, the back plane, the plate, let's call it the plate, is, it might start to illuminate the plane with its glow. You don't want that to happen, right? So, as of now, we can just lower this and get a more blurry background through the camera. And this is just awesome because now you have full freedom, you can zoom in, and it's just a completely different story when you're playing with a photo like that. Plus, you still have camera movement, and you can still do some, not everything, but some tweaks here. Now, the more lighting you receive like that from the front, so to speak, the more you might need to tone it down using the environment tab here, right? We can go here and say, hey, I want a haze, and I don't want to have any sunlight that strong. So you can go in here and say the sun intensity might be a little bit lower. So you can still adjust that. Plus you have a master slider, if you will, and that is the one over here, tone mapping. You have some setting called ISO. You can use this for any of the methods we've been outlining so far. You can do 50, which is going to darken everything, okay? And you can do 200, which will brighten everything. In the same fashion, you still have additional controls here, which is the tone mapping, right? You can set it to different tone. Now, if you recall the previous video, when I talked about the static background being put using the environment tab over here, that one had individual brightness control. Remember, you had a background, and you can click on the color there and choose a different scale and so forth. That was controlled individually. Right now, when you change here in tone mapping the intensity, you're changing everything. So see, there is pros and cons with everything, right? So here, if you need to tone down the background, you would need to go into the plane and the surfaces tab, and here control the luminous. You can have a really darker mood if you want to. So that was about using this method. Now there is still one more method which we're going to cover in the next video, and that is going to be rendering the plane individually and then jumping into Photoshop and adding a background there, and also adding some kind of foreground clouds, or I'm going to show you how to hide the plane in clouds as well. So guys, as I said, we are covering a lot of techniques. Each have pros and cons. You can go wild with all this. Speaking of which, you can still apply bloom to this. It still works. Exact the same fashion. It's going to be is applicable to the background and the plane. All right. So that's that. White point. Let's do something warmer. And voila. We can do a little bit less intense, smaller radius, and play with those effects in here as well. So this method is one of my favorite because it just gives you so many cool options and looks really, really good, right? Like I said, we are jumping now to Photoshop with a little bit of help of Dash Studio in the next video, guys. So thanks for watching. See you soon again.